So picking up where we left off last week when we were talking about Galatians 3, we're just gonna flow right into Galatians 4 because Galatians was written as a letter. It didn't really have chapter and verse breakdowns when it was written, and so Paul writes this letter to the Galatians, and he continues this whole thought and this whole idea of how we're not just wards of the law anymore, but we're actually adopted into the family of God. And he draws this comparison between slaves and sons. And he paints this beautiful picture about how we were once slaves to the law. We were bound by our own sinfulness under the law, that we couldn't attain the righteousness that it requires to be in the presence of God or in the family of God. And how through Jesus, we are then adopted into the family of God. And because we are adopted into the family of God, Galatians 4 says that we are no longer slaves, but we are sons. And if we are sons, then we are also fellow heirs. Take a moment just to think about the implications of that. We're fellow heirs of the richness and of the inheritance and of the glory of God. And the only one really deserving of the inheritance is Christ himself. But he did what he did so that we could share in that. And so he gives us that opportunity to go from slave to son, to go from a ward of the law to a child of God, and how freeing that is. Being able to be adopted into the family of God, knowing that God has terminated the rights that sin holds over us because we don't measure up to the law that he gave us, and instead paid the price through Jesus, who then shares the inheritance with us. And so the real question of the week, I guess, as we look at Galatians 4, and I hope that you do, I hope that you'll go and read this for yourself, but the real question is, what are we going to do with it? As a child of God, am I going to represent God as one of his sons? Is he going to be proud of me for carrying his name? Great example that I could think of, really, and that many of you probably could do as well, is consider your last name. You got your last name from somewhere, right? Likely from your parents, and even more likely from your dad, at least in most cases, at least in our culture and our society. And so I carry the last name Woodring because that's my father's name. And so is me living as Woodring something that is representative of what he would value and what he would stand for? Or do I tarnish that name? Do I run it through the mud? Am I allowing myself to live up to the name that I have? Now that's a very earthly and a very simple example of how we're supposed to live as children of God and carrying the so-called name of God with us. If we're going to call ourselves Christian, which bears that same weight, are we doing it justice? Or are we tarnishing the name of God by the way that we live, by the way that we treat other people, by the way that we talk about him, or maybe don't talk about him? Do we look more like we're ashamed of being a child of God? Or do we wear it with pride? Not pride in ourselves, but pride in him. What do we do with the inheritance that he's given us? If you're a child of God, if you've accepted Jesus into your life and accepted that sacrifice that he made for you so that he could share that inheritance with you, you are a fellow heir, and you are adopted into the family of God. Are you living like it?